Welcome to the tutorial of SQL language. In this tutorial, we will learn some basics of the SQL language. As we know that SQL language is used to deal with the RDBMS, that is Relational Database Management System. SQL is used to query the databases, and we know that SQL is the one most common and powerful language. It is the most commonly used language in the world to use the to relate or to fetch the data from the database. So let us start with some theoretical concepts, definition and advantages of the SQL in this lecture today. So we know that SQL is the structured query language that is used to query the database. Now the question is, what is database? So database is a collection of raw data and facts that are organized, right? So raw data are collected and then they are organized in the form of tables. So whenever we create tables in a database, those tables are known as relations, and such databases are known as relational database management systems. So now, to store the data, to fetch the data, to update the data and to manage this database, we use SQL, structured query language. So some of the database management systems that uses the SQL are MySQL, SQL Server, Access, Oracle, Sybase, DB2 and more, many more databases. And that is why we have only one language, SQL, to deal with all the databases. So it is one of the topmost language in the world. SQL is a standard language for accessing and manipulating databases. Now the question is, what is SQL? So SQL stands for Structured Query Language and lets you access and manipulate the databases. SQL is an ANSI, that is American National Standard Institute standard. What SQL can do? So let's talk about what SQL can do. As we have already talked that SQL is used to deal with the databases. So let's read out the points. SQL can execute queries against a database. SQL can retrieve data from a database. Let's say the data is stored in tables and you want to fetch all the data inside the table, then you will use the SQL retrieve query. SQL is used to insert records in the database, and SQL is used to update the records in the database which we have already stored. So those stored records can be updated with the help of the SQL. It can delete the records from the database. It can create new databases also. SQL can create new tables in a database. SQL can create stored procedures, triggers, views and many other structures in the database. SQL is also used to set permissions on tables, procedures, views, and all these things. So in this way, the SQL is used to manage the database also. Using SQL, we can manage the user's control and access to the database also. Now let us see the features of SQL. So the features of SQL, it is a non-procedural language. It is a language which is very much similar to English statements. So it is easy to learn. SQL can process a single set of records at a time. It can process single set or in single or a set of records. It can process a single row or it can process multiple rows at a time. So now it defines what is to be done rather than how it is to be done. So it is more on the definition of what is to be done, instead how it is to be done, like how is the case for the programming languages like C and Java and C++, but SQL deals with what is to be done. So SQL can be defined in subquery languages, like it is the combination of DDL, DML and DCL. So DDL is the data definition language which is used to define the structures in the database. Now DML is the sub language which contains the commands which are used to manipulate the stored data like deletion, updation, and DCL is the controlling language which controls the user's access onto the database. We will see these commands later in the upcoming videos of the SQL tutorial. And the last feature, it insulates the user from underlying structures. That is, it provides basically a bridge that will connect the user with the data structure with the abstraction. So it will not allow users to worry about the physical structure. Now let's talk about some more definitions. RDBMS, we had seen RDBMS. So this is the relational database management system where data is stored in the relations. That means in the tables. So RDBMS is the basis for SQL, and all the modern database systems like MS SQL Server, MySQL, IBM DB2, and Microsoft Access are the relational database management systems and are based on SQL language. So to fetch data, to store data, to update data, we use SQL with these database management systems. The data in RDBMS is stored in database objects, and these objects are called tables, or we can also call them as relations. A table basically is a collection of related data, and it consists of columns and rows. So columns indicate the data fields and rows indicates the data values. So what is a database table? A database table is, we had already talked about that it is a collection of related data that is in the column and row form. So let's see an example of the table. So this is an example of a table where the name of the table is person. It has 4 fields. One is the person ID, then it's the last name, first name, address, and city. So we can see that there are some records into this table. So we'll see that there are 3 records into this table. So the table consists of 5 columns and 3 records. SQL statement. What we mean by SQL statement? Most of the actions we need to perform on a database are done with the SQL statements. For example, we need to insert a row in the database. So we will use one statement. We need to fetch the database from the database. Then we'll need to write a statement. We need to update or delete, or we need to perform any action on the database. Then we perform that with the help of the SQL statements. So one example of an SQL statement that is performed on the person table to retrieve the data is given below. So this is a select asterisk from person. So this is a statement, a select statement, a statement that will fetch the records from the person table. All the fields, it will fetch all the fields. So asterisk is a wild card. We'll study it later in the upcoming tutorial lectures. Keep in mind that SQL is a non-case sensitive language. So case sensitive means you can write it in upper case letters or in lower case letters. It doesn't matter. Like in other programming languages, for example, Java is a case sensitive language. C is a case sensitive language. But SQL is non-case sensitive language. Do we need to write a semicolon after SQL statements? Many databases use this concept of ending a statement with the semicolon. That indicates that the statement has come to an end here and it is needed to be executed. So a semicolon is required in many databases just to indicate the end of the statement. So that's it for the today's lecture. I hope you have understood the theory and some important concepts about the SQL language. From the next lecture, we will begin with the SQL basic and the sub languages DDL, DML, and DSL. And we will continue with the commands and clauses that are used in the SQL. For example, creating a database, creating a table, storing the records in the database, updating the records, deleting the records. So that's it for the lecture, and do watch the next lecture. Thank you so much.